So, as of March 11, 2026, I read that about 42% of people living in cities have at least one, networked biological thing, like a device or implant connected to them. These things send out real-time data, and it all goes on to some kind of distributed ledger. I guess private companies and insurance folks are the ones keeping track. This isn't some wild guess about the future, it's just what's been happening, slowly, for years. Funny thing is, all this tech was originally built for business, not for our bodies. But somehow, it just fit. At first it was just stuff like heart rate, glucose, brain waves, things that seemed pretty harmless to track. The big idea was, catching health problems before they even showed up. Proactive care, I guess. It sounded like a way to finally have some control over things that usually just happen to us. I think that's why so many people liked it. It didn't happen all at once. It was more like one device here, an update there, easy to get used to. Every step made life a bit easier, or at least that's how it felt. There were real benefits, like people with diabetes didn't have to prick their fingers anymore. Some folks even got warnings before a seizure hit. That's huge. Honestly, some of these changes were just life-changing. Hard to argue with that. The way people talked about it, it was all about empowerment. Owning your health data, making medicine fairer for everyone. But, the data never really stayed with the person. It always ended up in the network. All that info got bundled up, analyzed, and sold. Our bodies kind of became, well, fuel for this new digital economy. We weren't just using tech anymore, we were making the data it needed just by living. Our bodies turned into like living nodes in this giant, always hungry system. It happened so gradually, I barely noticed. But looking back, it's kind of wild. All that talk about empowerment, I don't know, sometimes I wonder what we gave up without realizing it. It's like, the more connected we got, the less we stood out as individuals. The network just kept growing. Now our bodies are just constant streams of data. Privacy, I'm not sure that's even a thing anymore. I guess this is just what life is now. The age of the networked self. Sometimes I wonder if connecting our biology to the internet was ever really something we decided on. It doesn't feel like a choice I remember making. It's more like, all those earlier steps, smartphones, fitness trackers, just getting used to sharing data all the time, kind of led us here. I guess bit by bit, we traded away privacy for convenience. Maybe it was easier than we thought it would be, and with healthcare getting more expensive, it made sense to look for answers in all this new data, predictive analytics, biometric streams, that sort of thing. Insurers started offering discounts if you let them monitor you. Governments even help pay for the tech sometimes. I don't think anyone set out to create some grand conspiracy. It just seemed practical, honestly. But somewhere along the way, our bodies turned into just another data set to optimize. And the laws, stuff like GDPR, it was made for a different kind of internet. It already feels kind of old. Even though biometric data is so personal, we just click a box and hand it over. Getting a device implanted, that's basically agreeing to send out your data for the rest of your life. That's a lot to take in. The law just hasn't kept up. It's like it's always a few steps behind, and the tech keeps moving forward. Now tracking ourselves, our steps, our sleep, our moods, it's just normal. Everyone's doing it. Sometimes it feels like life itself is just a bunch of numbers, productivity, sleep, even how we feel, all measured and tracked. And the way it's sold to us? It's not just about health anymore. It's about being better, being optimized. That's what we're told to want. I guess now our bodies are kind of like projects, always connected, always managed by the network, and honestly, I'm still figuring out how I feel about that. At first, it all seemed a bit like a novelty, biohackers experimenting with RFID chips, or people trying out smart pills to track their medication. Maybe these were just the first hints of something bigger, networked objects finding their way inside our bodies. Then, corporate wellness programs started encouraging health trackers. Sometimes it felt like opting out wasn't really an option. There were social and even financial consequences. The data was supposed to be anonymous, but it quietly opened the door to new kinds of workplace surveillance. In a way, the workplace became a kind of testing ground for biological monitoring, maybe the first one on a large scale. The devices themselves changed over time. What started as clunky monitors gradually became sleek wearables, then almost invisible patches, and eventually, internal implants. Pacemakers had always been internal. But now, more and more devices were designed to connect and communicate with the outside world. Implants started acting like network endpoints, quietly broadcasting information about our bodies. It's interesting, ownership of that data seemed to shift from something personal to something stored in the cloud, and eventually, to something that could be bought and sold. Free health platforms offered their services, but behind the scenes, they were selling aggregated data to corporations. Sometimes it felt like the individual wasn't really the customer anymore. Maybe we'd become the product. The real value seemed to lie in the raw biological data we generated, whether we realized it or not. It's hard not to wonder if the business model was less about service and more about extraction. In a sense, our body's data started to feel like a kind of currency. Surveillance was often presented as a benefit, something to improve our lives. The integration happened quietly, almost unnoticed, but it touched nearly every part of life. Looking back, the transformation was so subtle it was easy to miss, until suddenly, it was everywhere. So, I guess the real shift happened when two things, kind of collided. First, well, there were these bio-integrated power sources, kinetic, thermal. Suddenly, implants didn't need to be replaced or recharged, they just kept going. That was honestly a little surprising. Getting an implant started to feel like, a lifelong commitment, not something you could just undo. Then there was the Scarcity Act of 2024. Suddenly all these advanced medical parts were, well, hard to find. I remember feeling a bit uneasy about that. Access to smart organs, yeah, it started depending on things like your job, how you behaved, or I guess how useful you were. It wasn't doctors making the calls anymore. It was, algorithms. That felt strange. The rules? They were hidden, always changing and honestly, kind of cold. People, well, we sort of faded into the background. The system's needs came first. That was hard to process. Suddenly, your own body data decided if you got to keep the tech that kept you alive. That realization, it still makes me pause. If you were cut off, that was it. No more support. It's a bit unsettling. The body, my body, anyone's, became something you kind of rented. The system could just take it back. That quiet, almost invisible integration. It was over. Now control was obvious. Maybe too obvious. The system made sense, I guess, but it didn't really care. Your fate? It was just a calculation. That's a lot to take in. In the end, the body's independence, well, it kind of slipped away. You know, sometimes I wonder if we realized what we were doing as society started to split, those with all the new tech inside them, and those who stayed, well, just human. The folks with networked organs seemed to get all the perks, longer lives, sharper minds. It looked like an obvious advantage, but I'm not sure it was that simple. And then there were the people who didn't plug in, either because they couldn't or just didn't want to. They stayed fully biological, and sometimes I think they felt left behind. Or maybe just left out. It's strange, but a new kind of class system grew out of all this, one based on what was inside you, and how much data you could produce. The people who ran the networks and algorithms seemed to hold all the cards. Sometimes I wondered if anyone else even had a say. Work changed too. The best jobs went to those who were enhanced, while everyone else got what was left. It didn't always feel fair. Sometimes jobs just disappeared. Now work gets handed out by whatever your body data says you're good for. It's efficient, I guess, but it feels a little cold. Human resources? That's just an algorithm now. I'm not sure anyone really talks to a person anymore. Even relationships changed. People check their compatibility by comparing heartbeats and brain scans. I guess it takes some of the guesswork out, but maybe it also takes out the magic. Privacy's kind of faded away. Everything's out in the open now, even the things we used to keep to ourselves. Sometimes, I miss not knowing everything about everyone. There was something special about the mystery of other people. People talk a lot about free will these days. I'm not sure anyone really agrees on what it means anymore. Now, potential isn't something you find. It's something that gets calculated for you. I wonder if that's really progress. Most days, it feels like we're all just following the paths the system lays out. Maybe that's safer, but I can't help but wonder what we've lost along the way. You know, back then, everyone talked about human enhancement. The idea was that we could go beyond our limits, maybe even outsmart aging. The pitch was simple: more data, more control, a better life. It sounded good, but honestly, it seems like the real aim wasn't to make us better, but to make us easier for machines to understand. Biology was kind of the last thing we hadn't measured. Once we connected everything, even a heartbeat became just another data point. I guess in the end, it didn't really give us control, it handed it over to the system. Sure, we got dashboards and charts, but the real power, that stayed with the folks running the networks and the data markets. Algorithms nudged us, flagged risks, pushed products. Sometimes it was hard to tell where our choices ended and theirs began. Most of the time, we were just along for the ride. The Internet of Bodies, if I'm being honest, felt less like freedom and more like being managed. We were kind of standardized, made predictable, maybe even profitable. All that talk about superhuman abilities, it was a good distraction from the fact that we were just becoming more efficient. Assets, I guess. Enhancement, it turns out, was mostly for the system, not really for us. So, maybe what we thought was control was just the system tightening its grip. Funny how that works. You know, I remember when those old clunky trackers first showed up. Now it's like they've just melted into us, part of our everyday lives. Every new step felt like we were moving forward. It was supposed to make us safer, more certain about everything. Honestly, I think a lot of us went along with it because we were scared. Scared of getting sick, or just being left behind. Somewhere along the way, it started to feel like we were changing ourselves to fit the technology, instead of the other way around. Our bodies became something to be managed, almost like public property, for the sake of the system. We gave up the messiness of being human for something more controlled, safe, sure, but maybe a little too neat. Sometimes it feels like we don't really own ourselves anymore. We're just renting space in our own skin. It wasn't forced on us. We said yes. We let it in. We really believed all this data would set us free. I'm not sure we realized how much power we were handing over. We traded control for comfort, for the hope that life could be painless. Now, the system probably knows more about my body than I do. It can track every heartbeat, every breath. But it'll never understand why my heart races when I hear a song I love, or when I fall for someone. The system is flawless, in its way. But it can't really grasp what makes us, well, us. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection and see all that data flickering across my skin, I just wonder, will we remember how to listen to our own hearts, beyond what any system can measure?